All right, everyone, welcome. We are live. I am here with Snake Was Right. He is having a debate with Matt Slick from the Christian Apologetics Research Ministry firm on February 2nd on Standing for Truth's channel. I linked to that debate in the description down below. I'm just here to help Snake prepare for this upcoming debate. So, Snake, welcome to the channel, and feel free to introduce yourself. And a very cute dog, by the way.
Oh, thanks. She's new.
Oh, what?
Yeah. So I'm having a debate with Matt Slick on morality, secular morality. I wanted to be sure it was secular and not atheist necessarily, just to kind of isolate the variables there. Because I'm not even I mean, we'll get to it, but basically, so anyone who doesn't know about my channel, Snake Was Right is basically a reference to the biblical snake. Basically, the whole ethos is knowledge of good and evil is the correct thing to do. That's why the snake was right for rebelling. And the whole meta narrative behind that too is knowledge is worth it. Even if you get kicked out of the garden, it was worth it because the truth is what's most important. So that's kind of my whole thing on my channel. I try to get at the truth of things, and yeah.
Okay, and wonderful. And I just linked Snake's channel in the sidebar chat, and I will link his channel in the description after this debate. So, do you want to start giving your presentation or whatever? You can present your arguments, and then I'll respond.
Sure. We could do like a mock debate too, or we could
Yeah,
just have a discussion of the tactics.
yeah.
Whatever.
I can definitely play Matt. I know Matt Slick for almost 10 years now, so
Oh yeah,
I can definitely play Matt Slick in a mock debate.
yeah.
So,
So
I
I don't have it all put together on how I'm gonna do it like on the actual day, but I'll try and go through my main points. Um, so as I was saying, I wanted to be sure to do secular morality because it's really not about denying God. I can even assume God for the purposes of the debate. Um, and that's actually one of the methods that I used to kind of come to my conclusions about morality is assuming a God and then um, asking myself, okay, so even assuming there's a God and assuming he's correct about everything, we can do that. We have to examine, okay, why is he correct? Is he correct because it's the Euthyphro dilemma? Is it because he's God and just has all this power and any possible thing that he happens to agree with that's just correct by default and definition, or is there some kind of rational justification behind the things that God holds? And I obviously stick to the latter. And so, but the other point of saying that is also kind of tactical. It's to show that this view of morality is compatible with belief in God, and that I'm not trying to take away their belief in God by saying that relying on God said it, I believe it, it's true, kind of tactics or principles. And so that the key difference is relying on rational justification rather than an appeal to authority, and that's what I think. That's why I think that the Christian or the Christian way that Matt Slick employs and some others employ their version of morality is rather stunted because it really stops before we can answer the question. You can ask them, okay, why is murdering babies wrong? And they'll always stop at because God's word says it's wrong. But it's literally stunted because they can't go any further than that. They're unable, because of this principle of it's rooted in God's nature, they're unable to answer the question, okay, why is God's nature that way? So, and my model can accommodate both an atheist and a theist frame of view because it's not a variable. It doesn't matter if there's a God or not. What matters is whether that God or the humans without a God or the humans with a God, all of that matters is do they have rational justification for what their proclamations on morality are. And so the problem there with relying on God as the authority is, well, they're not able to distinguish between the proclamations of the true God or the true hypothetical God, or the hypothetically whatever God it is that is correct about everything, and they're not able to distinguish between that and an evil God, or someone who's pretending to know the mind of God, or someone who is talking about the right God but is mistaken about what that God wants. They're unable to make any possible distinction between those two. And so someone theoretically could do that, but people like Matt Slick are not able to do that. And the only way that you could do that is, again, with rational justification. If you're going to sit there and say, okay, is a God that advocates for slavery, is that a good God? Could that be the hypothetical God that is correct about everything? Well, if he advocates for slavery, then no. The answer is no, because slavery is unjustifiable. The response to that, obviously, is, well, if God said it's okay, then it must be okay. He must have a good reason. And then it circles back, of course, to, okay, so then you're unable to distinguish between an evil God who's just telling you to do something evil and you're just believing him just on faith that he's right by definition. And also that ignores the fact that God has to have rational justification, or it's just a subjective suggestion. It's just a random thing about God. He can't be correct just by virtue of the fact that he's powerful. So let's see what else I have. Yeah, I think those are my main points. Yeah, and we can get into, I think one of the things I'm going to try and do in the debate is go on the offensive. This is like the meta narrative part. I wouldn't say this in my opening, but these apologists tend to attack, okay, well, what standing do you have? They're always going to be like, okay, so how you're just relying on your subjective view. You don't have any way of knowing that you're correct without God, basically. That whole shtick. And I'm going to try and expose that relying on God is subjective and unreliable, that I'm making fewer assumptions by assuming rationality, and I'm not going to give up that point either. I would say, assuming for a second that I'm just assuming rationality is true, but I'm going to also try and defend that we don't have to assume that rationality is true, or at least we don't have to assume the line of logic, I think, therefore I am. We can be sure that something exists, and everything else maybe we're not so sure about. But all we have is the best we can do. And the best they can do is not good enough. It makes far too many assumptions, and it's unreliable because it's indistinguishable from things that are false. And so I'm going to also try and go on the offensive and ask continuously, okay, so why is that wrong? Why is that wrong? Why does God think that that's wrong? And they can't answer it. That's the whole point of what my model is trying to achieve, is you could provide, this is the answer God, the correct God, would provide. And those same answers can be reasoned to by rational reasoning beings without a God, because we don't require a God to reveal it to us. We have the powers of reason. We might not be able to do everything a perfect God would be able to do, but we would be able to come to some of the same conclusions using some of the same justifications and processes as a perfect God would.
Everything.
And yeah, so let's jump in.
All right, awesome. Let's go. So I'm just gonna pretend to be Matt Slick here,
Okay.
and kind of just go right in. So what is morality? Morality is, of course, the distinction between right and wrong. It is the determination of what should be done and what should not be done. Morality, though, is often, morality is that which is in concordance with the nature of God. Consider the following. If objective moral duties do not exist, then God does not exist. Objective moral facts do exist, and therefore God does exist by necessity. For example, it is always wrong for anyone to torture babies to death merely for their own personal pleasure. There are two important points about this moral position. Number one, that this statement is universally applied to everyone at all times. It is always wrong across all time and across all space for anyone to do such an action. And number two, merely for their personal pleasure designates the reason that the action is performed. There are no other conditions. Um, so, um, Pardon me, kind of flipping back towards my notes here. So let's talk about the Euthyphro dilemma. That, of course, is a false dilemma because it proposes two ideas about God and morality. That morality is either based on what God says or because it's already wrong. However, the Christian response to this is that that what is right or wrong, it depends on God's character. For example, God is life, therefore murder is wrong. God is truth, therefore lying is wrong, and so forth. Um, so you brought up slavery. So why is slavery wrong?
Oh, are we doing discussion?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna throw out some of the stuff that
Okay.
Matt Smith is gonna say.
Yeah.
So, actually, I'm gonna back up a little bit further.
Okay.
How do you define morality?
Uh, so so you said something about morality is in concordance with what God's nature is. I have some questions about why God's nature is that way, but I would define morality simply as what is the correct and incorrect way to act or to be.
Okay, and how do you know what is the right way to act?
With rationality and by checking that against the principle, which we can derive as the basic principle of morality would be freedom, but I don't want to confuse that with the definition of morality.
Okay, so when you bring up logic and reason, he's probably going to bring up the tag arguments. So, how do you justify logical truths in an atheist worldview?
Well, it's pretty much all we have. If we have no possible way, if I'm just a crazy person hallucinating all of this in a loony bin, well, so be it. We have no way of knowing the difference. All we can do is have as best rational justification as we can, and the way we can do that is to have models. And if those models make predictions that we're able to act upon, and they're able to predict the future, and they're able to be useful as tools, then those are most likely the best things. Even if we're all in a matrix or in a delusion, those things hold true in the delusion or the matrix. What if you're in a dream, whatever, those are the rules of whatever reality you happen to be in, even if it's not the meta reality. So the only thing we can do is approximate the truth, and that's a much better way of doing it than just having faith in a God, because you're much more likely to make errors just having faith in a God than without rationality. Because the other thing about having faith in a God is that you're unable to distinguish that God from an evil God. So you have to rely on rationality to distinguish those in the first place. So we're in the same boat there.
Okay, let's see here. Trying to think how Matt Slick will probably respond to that. So, we have two separate people or whatever. How do you determine two people thinking logically different? How do you know who is right?
Well, you can put it to the test. If the simplest possible example would be if someone says 2 + 2 = 5 and 2 + 2 = 4, you can just have 2 rocks and 2 rocks and count up till the total is complete, and whoever said 4 was right.
All right. I might play some of Matt Slick's stuff here.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah, I think it'll be worth bringing some of his videos. So I'm going to bring up his questions to atheists on standard morality and see how you might respond. Since he's probably gonna ask these questions here.
Yeah. While you pull that up, I'm gonna be right back. 1 second.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me know when you're ready.
All right. All set.
All right. This is a set of questions for atheists, and it's dealing with the topic of morality, in particular, having a standard of morality. Now, I've got about I think 36 questions here. I need to read them in order, and you'll see why. I'm not saying they're all showstoppers and things like that, but they're intended for atheists to, well, hopefully, answer some questions. They like to ask them, see if you can answer them. All right. Regarding an objective standard, do you have an objective standard of morality by which you can judge whether or not something is morally right or wrong? Number 2.
Yeah, and that would just be so the standard, the method we would use would be logic, and the language that we would use too. The standard, I guess you could say, is just its adherence to the principles of logic and the adherence to the facts that are. So I mean so every statement would have to both be logically valid and sound at the same time.
Okay, so that's like my next. Okay, so how would logic prove that torturing babies for fun is always wrong?
Well, it contains within it a contradiction, and so that is incorrect. It's just as incorrect as making a contradiction in a math problem. So, so all I'm saying is literally just incorrect. Like,
so what is the contradiction?
So there's a principle of freedom, and that if you take away others' freedoms, and that's a contradiction. It's a contradiction of an established ethic, like if you do unto others as you would do unto them. That's
okay. Sure. So why are humans free? Why do we have freedom?
Freedom is why do we have freedom, or why should that be the moral principle?
Both questions. You should answer both questions because he'll probably ask both of them.
Freedom is basically just the summation of all the potentials the system has. So, okay, and then go ahead.
So for freedom, what about the person who is torturing babies for fun? Why doesn't he have that freedom?
Well, it's I'm not sure. I'm sure there's a word for this kind of conflict where both of you are entitled to freedom, but any actions that initiate the restriction of another's freedom, that's where the error occurs.
Okay, so So again, how do we determine whose freedom, so to speak, is taken away? Is it the baby's right to not be tortured, or the person's right to not torture, to be able to torture whoever they want?
Well, in the ideal world, that person would be able to have some sort of simulation where they could squish a baby's head and see it, but it wouldn't be a real baby, is the thing. And so everyone's freedom would remain intact. It would just essentially be a simulation, but he would get to experience the sensations of that. Not saying that that's a admirable thing to have, but that would preserve everyone's freedom. There would be no conflicts of freedom there. But the initiation of harm is essentially where it starts. So if someone initiates harm on you and then you end up killing them in self-defense, it's the killing is still wrong because it's bad because you're still reducing the freedom of the system, but it was a justified response because you are setting things back to normal, because the initiation is what sets things out of balance.
All right, so for freedom or stuff like that, let's say harm. How do you define harm? Let's say that I am very allergic to smoke or whatever, and you're smoking in front of me, do I have the right to force you to stop smoking, or punch you in the face so you will stop smoking because you're giving me an issue? So, where do we draw that line?
That would be decided on property ethics, so it depends on whose property it's taking place on. If you're over at someone's house and they're smoking, it would be your duty to remove yourself from that situation. If they were on your property and smoking, you could kick them off of your property. And that's all
Okay.
derived from you put work into something, you own your actions, and if your actions produce something, you own what it produces.
Okay, so what if it's in a public domain?
Well, that's shared space, so I guess it depends. In public, you could just walk away, so you could solve
Okay,
that
so
conflict.
what if they were in a position where they could not one cannot walk away from the other, such as maybe someone is in a taxi, and you're sharing a taxi, and there's no way to be able to get out. How would you deal in that situation there?
Well, I mean, I guess I would object to taxi, but taking the spirit of the question, if you're kind of both trapped in a situation, I would say that you are initiating, since it's shared space, you are initiating a aggression against the other person by forcing this new condition on the space. If for some reason, let's just say smoking was necessary for your health and it harmed the other person, that again just comes down to a self-defense problem. If there's one piece of food and you both need the piece of food, there's no solution to that. It's just it's the same either way. So there's no way to solve that other than whoever gets there first.
Okay, so let's move on, playing through this video.
If you do not have an objective standard of morality by which you can determine what is right or wrong, then from where do you get your morals? Number 3, if you do not have an objective standard of morality by which you can determine what is right and wrong, then how are your moral values not just based on your subjective opinions? Number 4, if you do not have an objective standard of morality by which you can determine what is right or wrong, then what gives you the right to make moral judgments upon Nazi Germany or the God of the Bible?
I mean, I agree with him that subjective morality is essentially flawed, and I don't think it means anything to say subjective morals, because if you're saying that, then it's just, okay, well, my preference is to kill you and your preference is not to be killed, and who cares? There's nothing to be further to be said. It's just whoever gets what they get. So I agree with objective morality. There is correct and incorrect. So was there a question I should else respond to? I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that I was objective morality.
Yeah, that sounds good, and
Okay.
I'll continue.
Okay.
If you do not have an objective standard of morality by which you can determine what is right or wrong, then should anyone adhere to your moral standard of what is right and wrong? Number 6, if you say that people should
I agree with that.
Your moral standard of what is right and wrong, then how is your standard?
I'm sorry, did you say anything?
I was just saying I agree with that criticism.
Okay.
Of any value to anyone. Number 7, if you say that people should adhere to your subjective moral standard, then who decided that your subjective moral standard is the one that anyone should follow? Number 8.
Well, positive.
Objective standard.
I think him asking who decided is very telling, because I don't think it would be a who. That would be by definition subjective, which is why his version of morality is severely flawed, because it depends on a who, which is by definition subjective. So it has to be a contingent upon a what decides it. And that would just be facts of the universe. Of course, he's going to say the who of God is the fact of the universe, something like that.
standard of morality by which you can judge what is right or wrong, then how do you determine what is right or wrong? Number 9, if you don't need an objective standard of morality by which you can determine what is right or wrong, then how do you know that what you think is right and wrong really is right and wrong? Number 10, if you say that you do have an objective standard of morality, then where did you get this objective standard, since an objective standard is one that is not based on your opinion or your experience?
Yeah, so the first way that I did that was assume a God and ask myself, where would God get his standard? Because it can't be right virtue of the fact that God just holds this principle. There has to be some kind of rational justification for it. And that's where I would ask him, okay, well, what is God's rational justification for X, Y, and Z? And because he must have one, or it's just random and subjective. But this kind of conclusion really bothers them because they can't have God be an emergent property of anything. It has to be the cause of all things, which is self-contradictory any way that I can think of it, because he has these attributes that require him to be the cause of in order for his mind to even function in the first place. So it's just a mess. Just saying God did it, it sounds like it's like this profound, like, end all be all thing, but when you actually analyze it, it has no content.
Number 11, if you say that you got your objective standard of morality from society, then what justifies the idea that society is the proper place to obtain the standard of morality? If you say you got your objective standard of morality from society, then which society has the right moral system when they contradict each other? Number 13, if you say that you got your objective standard of morality from society, then if Nazi Germany was morally wrong to put Jews to death, why was it wrong, since its morals were derived from its society? Number 14, how is having a moral standard based on societal norms not ultimately subjective, since that society is comprised of individuals with subjective moral standards?
Yeah, these are all.
If you believe that society produces an objective moral standard, then how does an accumulation?
Yeah, these are all legitimate questions. What he's getting to is the flaws in subjective morality, where you can have contradictory propositions being true at the same time, which is not logical.
Correct. And yeah, that's why I'm not a moral relativist.
Very good. Very good.
So let's continue.
Of individuals with subjective moral standards within that society produce an objective moral standard. Number 16. If society is what determines moral truth, then how is this not committing the logical fallacy of begging the question by saying that a society determines what is right and wrong because a society determines what is right and wrong? Number 17, if society determines what is right and wrong, then it is deriving morals from itself. Aside from the issue of...
Are you hearing the echo?
No, sorry. I'm going to have to mute myself.
Okay. Skip back like maybe 5 seconds or so.
What is right and wrong, then it is deriving morals from itself. Aside from the issue of whether or not God exists, why then would you reject the rationale that God derives morals from himself and thereby declares what is right and wrong?
Okay, this is a big one.
Number 18, if society determines...
So this would be the same as saying I derive principles from myself. It's empty and meaningless, and it could be anything. That means that God could just say eating babies is what's moral, and that would be correct regardless of the logical contradictions inside of such an ethic. And so that cannot be a principle that's true. God can't derive principles from inside himself. That's subjective, and it's self-contradictory, and it creates absurdities like that he could just say anything is moral. And so I'm guessing the objection to that would be like, oh, well, God would never say such a thing. He would never say that eating babies is what is moral. And of course, that's admitting my entire premise, which is, okay, so God has these standards that are derived, that are true independent of himself. They are rooted in logic and not rooted in whatever. They're things that God can't make untrue, or he can't make eating babies true. It's not something he can decide. It's not something he, however you want to phrase it. So yeah.
What is right and wrong, then are the morals derived from society obligatory to all members of society? Number
Yes.
19. If the morals derived in society are not obligatory, then how are they proper morals that should be followed? 20. If the morals derived in society are obligatory, then from where do you derive the right to impose them on people? 21. If you say that society has the right to impose its morals on people, then how can you legitimately complain against Nazi Germany or the Jews of the Old Testament, since both societies impose their morals on people? 22.
Well, hold on one sec.
If
you can't really blame a society for having standards. Now you can nitpick what those standards are, but of course any society by definition is going to have to enforce some kind of ethics, some kind of code of conduct. And the trick is not to say, oh, you're not allowed to enforce anything. Even an anarchist would agree there are, at least a political anarchist would say there are standards of behavior that society is justified in enforcing. It's just that some societies enforce unjustifiable standards of behavior. So that would be the difference there. But I think he's still kind of mostly just complaining about subjective standards of morality. So yeah.
you say your moral standard is based on common sense, then what do you do when what is common sense for one person contradicts what is common sense for someone else? 23.
So yeah, I guess this would be a good question. Like, what do you do, like, when what you think is logical versus what someone else thinks is logical? So this will be a good place for you to, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I think this is twofold. There's, the ontological truth value of it, and then there's the ethics, which is like the practicality of it. So you can go in and have the argument about who's correct and try and show what your justifications are, what the other person's contradictions are. That would be the nature of who's correct. As far as an ethical balance goes, if you have one way of life and someone else has another way of life, well, you can pretty much just agree to disagree and then go your separate ways, as long as one person doesn't force you to live your life that way and you don't force them to live their life that way. It works out. Everyone's fine. Obviously, I'm not including, like, if your way of life is like eating your own children, I'm justified in stopping you. But if your way of life is just like walking around naked all day long, and my society thinks that walking around naked in public is offensive, well, you can go live in your nudist society and I can go live in my society, and it all works out fine. Both people's freedoms are preserved. Both intuitions are preserved. It's, that's the solution. That's kind of the libertarian solution, I guess, the principles of it anyway.
3. If what you believe is common sense contradicts what someone else considers to be common sense, then are your judgments really common sense? 24. If, however, you say that your common sense morals should be followed by others because they are right, then how is that not being arrogant, since you are elevating your personal, subjective moral opinions above those of others and saying they should follow what you believe? 25. If you say that your moral standard, whether social or personal, is evolving and getting better, then by what non-subjective standard do you judge that it is getting better? 26.
Okay. It's kind of like science. We don't like, this is the problem with people who have this deep psychological need to have the absolute truth forever and always right now, and it be set in stone and never, because they can't take in new information, and they like to think that, oh well, the fact that we're able to change our minds, they think that that's a weakness. But really, if you're so stuck and rigid in your ways, that means you can't take on new information. That you're more likely to actually be incorrect, because they're ignoring the reality of the fact that we don't know everything, that we're constantly learning. So we have to acknowledge that there is a correct way of doing things, and that we might not know what the correct way to do it is. We have to constantly keep re-questioning and retesting it. It's the same as science. We don't know everything about science, but there are some things we know about it, and we know that we're going to keep learning new things, and it is a process. We don't have, if there's new information that comes by, then we need to be able to accommodate for that, or else we've pretty much already admitted that we're wrong, because there's always new information.
Okay.
If you say that your moral standard, whether social or personal, is evolving and getting better, then how do you know it is getting better without committing the logical fallacy of begging the question by saying things are getting better because they're evolving? 27.
All right, pause it.
If you say your standard is evolving and
Yeah, I don't think anyone would ever say it's better because it's evolving. You could sometimes things evolve in the wrong direction, obviously. Germany was better before the 1940s, and then it kind of evolved in the wrong direction, and then it evolved back in the right direction. So the way that you would check the state of your morality is just by consistently checking it against logical principles, checking it against itself for contradictions. One day you might discover, oh, we were overlooking this one fact, and then you can correct yourself. One day we might figure out, oh, well, there is some reason why it's wrong to kill any animals. Personally, I think I'm not a vegan or anything like that. But I think that we would be evolving in our morality if we found some way to not have to kill animals for their meat. Although I think we can derive that principle now before we have the technology to do it. But essentially, yeah, the way that you can check your evolving morality is just by staying consistent to rational principles. People in the evolving culture of Nazi Germany could have understood and checked, okay, well, we're evolving towards like a systemic level of racism, and obviously racism, I'm sure I don't have to unpack the contradictions there and the problems there. So you can say, okay, well, any system based on this flawed concept, we're moving away from what is rationally justified. I hope that gets to the heart of the question.
and getting better, then can you assert that it won't evolve into something that contradicts what you believe now, thereby demonstrating that your moral beliefs now were really wrong? 28.
Well, yeah.
If your moral standard is evolving and can contradict it.
Again, it's just the problem there is him wanting something that will hold true for all time, forever and always, and never change. And I don't want to repeat myself too much, but I understand where he's coming from, where, yeah, we're trying to get at a truth claim, but our understanding of the truth is changing. So that sets off alarm bells in his mind. But it's not really about that. It's about the methodology that we go through to find that truth needs to be reliable. And the more reliable methods are the ones that are able to accommodate more information as time goes on. The unreliable methods are the ones where you just stick to something and you just don't move. And you get to absurdities, and even if these absurdities are pointed out as we learn new things, you just stay in your position. Then you accumulate more and more absurdities, and that's the problem. I don't think a lot of the apologists understand the importance of methodology, because they're too focused on the conclusion versus how you get to the conclusion, if that makes sense. You can play it now.
So, can that system of moral determination be true since it can produce self-contradiction? 29. If you say your morals are self-determined, then are they true for...
I think the question was, is it something about... maybe you should just rewind a little bit. Something about, does it produce a self-contradiction?
29. If you say your morals are self-determined, then are they true for everyone or just for you? Number 30. If your self-determined morals are true only for you, then do you have the right to judge the morals of anyone else, such as the God of the Bible, by saying they are wrong?
Well, I think we missed it.
31.
But,
if you say that your morals are derived...
I was just going to add the comment, if your moral system, whatever it is, whatever your ethics are, if that produces a self-contradiction, that's an error-checking mechanism. So that's how we can evolve and get closer and closer to what is true. We're not ever going to just be in a place where, at least not within discernible future, within the short future, but we're never going to get in a place where we know every single thing is true and we know everything. But the point is to get closer, a little bit closer, a little bit closer. And the more contradictions we expose, the further we go from this place of muddled garbage ethics, and the closer we come to a cleaner version. Yeah. So that's how it evolves. It's not that the whole thing is changing and revolutionizing all the time. It's that we're slowly getting closer, and we're it's almost like purging the errors, basically.
From instinct, which is brain-programmed behavior, then how are they morals and not simply brain patterns to which you arbitrarily attach moral values? 32. If you say that your morals are derived from instinct, which is...
That would be my criticism of God-derived values, is it's just a mental process, mental behaviors that, what words did he use? Brain process, mental process from which morals are derived. That doesn't make sense, because it would be arbitrary, like you said. So that would be something I would really push on him to try and justify.
Is brain programmed behavior, then wouldn't that mean that different people's brains would produce different moral values? 33. If you say that your morals are derived from instinct, which is brain programmed behavior, then how would you really know if anything is right or wrong? 34. If you say that your morals are derived from instinct, which is brain programmed behavior, then how does one neurochemical state of the brain that leads to another neurochemical state produce proper moral truths? 35. If you really don't know what is right or wrong, but just go with whatever works, then what gives you the right to complain about anyone's moral actions anytime, anywhere, since different behaviors work for different people in different situations? And 36.
Okay. I think that one's important to address. So I think we would be using whatever works in a different kind of way, where the way I would typically use it is whatever works, in the sense that it's working out on paper, or the predictions made by the model hold true, that model is working. I think the way he's using it here though is like, okay, so it works to pillage and rape and plunder and get away with it, so that's fine. And that's not the kind of truths that we're talking about. So the question was, whatever works, it works for saying it's different things work for different people. So I would say, so it's important to address that the difference between how we're using it. And it's also important, like I was saying earlier, as long as whatever works for you isn't infringing on the freedoms of other people, that's also fine. If vanilla works for one person A and chocolate works for person B, you know, the better answer is to have both flavors. So each person gets their own flavor. So you can solve those kind of conundrums that way. That's why choice is an important aspect in this. And but if you're getting down to like, okay, well, whatever worked for Ted Bundy should be acceptable, and whatever works for people who aren't killers like Ted Bundy should also be acceptable. Again, that just goes to the contradictions. So they can't both be true at the same time. So which one, if either, they could be both wrong at the same time, but they can't both be true at the same time because they're mutually contradictory. And I think you can find contradictions in Ted Bundy's behavior, but you can't find contradictions in someone who's just living their life not murdering other people. So that would be the way that you could differentiate the two. And the one of the main criticisms I have for Christianity is they have no mechanism to do this. It's just, well, if it's written in the Bible, then that's acceptable. They're not, of course, they actually do use rationality to say, like, because they'll either apologize for or say slavery is not in the Bible, but they're using rational justifications outside of the Bible to do this. They're saying, okay, well, intuitively or rationally, we know this is wrong, so we're going to find excuses for it. So they're still trying to make the Bible actually fit rationality, but in their argumentation, they're going to say, well, if the Bible says it or if God says it, that's what breaks the deal. But under that principle or that model, so-called, you wouldn't really have any way of differentiating between the edicts of an evil God and the edicts of a good God, or the edicts of someone who's pretending to be speaking for a God, whether it exists or not. So I think that's they rely on the same thing that a secular morality would have to rely on, except they add more stuff into it and obfuscate it and introduce these things like, well, if a God says that it's true, this creates absurdities with it when you add that in. So Occam's razor would say you don't add in unnecessary principles to what you're talking about. So why don't we just stick with rationality and see if what these edicts are from whatever God, see if that adheres to rationality. If it doesn't, then obviously this God concept doesn't work. If it does adhere to rationality, that doesn't mean that it's true. It just means that we can't rule it out, on the grounds of morality, at least. So yeah, let's play it.
Really don't know what is right or wrong, but just go with whatever works. Then how is moral stability obtained when whatever works can change depending on circumstances and goals? All right, atheists, if you want to respond to this with a...
Okay, I think the heart of that one was maybe goes to what he was saying about goals.
Yeah.
I guess depending on, maybe the criticism is like, okay, how do you know which goals are correct? Basically. Yeah. But there are correct and incorrect ways to achieve goals. And I think that you can take those principles further and have a meta-analysis of which goals are correct in the sense of how they're going to affect the way things exist. If that makes sense. We can unpack that a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
So, one thing you need to know about Matt Slick is that he loves to steamroll the other person, just bringing up point after point after point. He is going to force you to be on defense. You need to figure out how to put Matt Slick on the offense.
Yeah,
One
that's
thing, he's going to force you to be on defense, and he wants you to be on defense the entire debate. Because Matt Slick, I don't think, really likes to be on the offense that much. I mean, excuse me, Matt Slick does not like to be on defense.
yeah.
So
When
you need
I
to.
when I did that to Darth Dawkins, that was basically when he rage quit.
Yeah, so force him to be on defense. So don't let him hog up the mic. Don't let him filibuster. Don't let him gish gallop. If he starts gish galloping, just say, "Hey, look, that's a gish gallop. Let's actually move on." One thing he likes to say to Catholics is, "My church father can beat up your first church father." You can kind of turn this around and say, "My God can beat up your God." So how do you know your God is correct and my God isn't? And he's going to, of course, use the Bible and Jesus and all that.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of go from there. So definitely make sure you don't let Matt Slick definitely make sure you do not let Matt Slick steamroll you.
Yeah, and I think that's a trend with a lot of the apologists, but they're definitely him, Darth Dawkins. They're kind of that's really what they rely on, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Because when you start forcing them to be on the offense, excuse me, when you force them to be on defense, that's when you start picking them apart and all of that. And they don't really like that much.
Yeah, because the point is they want to expose how empty our thing is, and this is hard stuff. A lot of people don't know how to answer really the fundamentals, and it's. I mean, I'm not going to claim to know it all, but I'm trying to think really deeply about it and trying to come up with the answers to these things that catch a lot of people off guard. But really, the point is how empty the answer of, well, God just did it. The answer is God. It's completely devoid of any substance. And just to a God believer, it sounds like, oh, well, you can rest it on the mighty being of God. But if there's no explanation of how God got to that conclusion, then it just as empty as saying, well, okay, well, it's based on Krishna or whatever, or it's just based on schlorpity gobbledygook, you know?
Exactly. We've been going for about almost an hour now. Do you have anything that you feel like we need to go over?
I don't know. I mean, we could watch a little bit more, or just end it on that, or
Let's see here.
however long you wanted to go.
Yeah, I think this will be a good place to end, and maybe we could
Okay.
do another part tomorrow or the next day. I'm pretty much free all week this week, so just let me know when you want to come on and chat, and maybe do another one right before the debate.
Yeah, maybe definitely do an after show.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely going to be hosting an after show, so that'll be fun.
Cool. Yeah.
But anyway, any last words before we sign off for the night?
Just thanks. Thanks for having this and thinking of me, and thanks for being part of the community. We're doing God's work.
Yes, indeed. So, everyone, Standing for Truth is having a debate tonight on evolution. He is doing that on his channel. Do not miss that debate. Head over to Standing for Truth's channel at, I think, 9. Let me double check the time for that. Truth debates. Naturalistic origins versus biblical creation, versus standing for truth versus this boy draws. That is at 9:30 tonight. So go over to Standing for Truth's channel and enjoy that debate. Depending on how I feel, I may or may not host an after show. So we'll just have to wait and see.
All right, man. Well, thanks again.
All right. Peace out.